or else we'll find out
All
very
right,
soon.
guys, we are live. Live. Hello, everybody. Steve Mitchell here, the Mind of Watercolor, and I am joined by Marty, my cohort in crime. Say hello, Marty, to everybody out there.
Hey, good evening or afternoon or morning, wherever you may be in the wide world. Steve and I are back for another, what is it called? Live Talking Art with Steve and Marty?
Something like that. Just talking nonsense, whatever you want to say. Well, tonight we have a really fun show planned, and I've been looking forward to this one. We're going to introduce you to Hajra Meeks, and Hajra has a YouTube channel. I'm not going to say too much about her background. I'm going to let her tell you most of that, but she's very talented artist and illustrator. And I thought the timing is good because, as you know, a lot of my channel subscribers, I told you that we're going to talk a little bit more this year about gouache and how I incorporate it sometimes into watercolor. And Hajra has a lot of experience in painting in gouache. So, you know, get ready with your questions for that towards the end. She has a very unique kind of materials and process, and we'll be discussing some of that. So, Hajra.
Hey, Steve and Marty. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really, really happy to be here. I've been excited about it for like 2 weeks, so thanks so much.
Oh, you're quite welcome. My pleasure. So tell everybody just a brief little bio background and you know, who you are, what you like to do, where you come from, at least as much as you're willing to reveal, and your art journey that's brought you here thus far up
Sure.
to YouTube.
Yeah, so I guess I could start by saying that I'm Pakistani American and I'm from California, and I've been here my whole life, and it's great. And I went to school in San Francisco. I studied physics for my undergraduate, and then I went to London for a year to study international history for my master's degree. So that's my educational background. I also studied children's picture books and children's literature a little bit, but I didn't get a degree for that. There was just a semester of work that I did later because I was interested. And I taught at a university for 4 years. I started when I was 23. I was lucky enough to be hired at the University of California, Merced, even before I had my degree coming to me in the mail. And so I was the youngest lecturer they hired and started at 23 and got really lucky to teach there for 4 years. I taught calculus and history and art history and decolonization and all sorts of cool stuff. And after that, I sort of took time off from teaching to go make it more part-time. And I'd always been exhibiting art. I loved art. It's kind of what I wanted to do my whole life, but I didn't get a chance to do it full-time until after those 4 years when I had to relocate for my husband's job. And then I took some time off for health obligations and family obligations. And then I found I just wanted to do art and writing full-time.
Nice.
Awesome. So I've always been interested in the academic part as related to art. And you mentioned art history, and it really comes through in a lot of the videos I've seen. I love, you know, a lot of the classical terms that you keep using and making people aware of and that sort of thing. Talk about that a little bit and what brought you to YouTube. Is that just a way to kind of keep you in the art world, keep you going, or did you have some other kind of idea?
Well, I think for me, it really scratched a teaching itch. I was really like missing teaching. And for me, I mean, you can be at home all day and I was writing up manuscripts and I was doing, some work for commissions for publishers and certain anthologies and stuff. And I just got bored doing just that type of stuff. And I also needed to take some time off from actual formal work because I had to help take care of my mom and my dad was sick too. So, and I just thought to myself, well, I really miss teaching. So, and I went onto YouTube and I saw a few channels earlier on. And Steve, you weren't on yet, but I did see somebody called the Virtual Instructor. And I also saw Jeff Watts, and they were doing these amazing sort of like just teaching art videos. And I thought, hey, this is like amazing. You get to have your own TV show and you can do this whenever you want from your house. So like, you know, why wouldn't I do this? It's free and I can teach and I can still work from home. So it's basically just to scratch the teaching itch. And I loved the format. It got addictive because even if you get only a few hundred views or 1,000 views or whatever, you're still reaching more people than you would if you were teaching in person in some ways. So it's quite magical.
Watts is amazing. I'm glad you brought him up. But
yeah, I love Jeff Watts. Jeff Watts and Jeff Miracola too. He's a really good channel. I think both of them. I think I lean towards fantasy and illustration type channels, and I love and I didn't see that as many terms. I did see the technique, but I didn't see like a lot of the art history and terms. So I thought, hey, why not add that in too? Because I can, and you know, when I can, I also add in a little bit of science with color theory and optics and such. But you know, whatever I consider squeeze in there as far as information.
Yeah, yeah. You have a very lecture, I mean, in an interesting way, very lecture-like sensibility to your channel, and I like that.
Thank you.
That's really cool.
I'm trying not to make it boring.
we all try to make it that.
One of the things that I'm trying to remember the first thing that I saw of yours. I don't know what the first. I've seen several. And you know how it is. You just you see one video and then you kind of link to another and you go back to another and then something else. I think it might have been Grisaille, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, probably was. I know you commented on a few of my videos and it made me feel really happy because I saw you doing formal watercolor videos too. And I earlier on, just starting from the very beginning, said, hey, it's really awesome that there's a lot of good channels starting to pop up around that time. So, and you were really one of them, and I was really happy that you commented on my video. But yeah, it was Grisaille, and I think it was it's funny because you said that that you were doing underpainting before, but you didn't know it was called Grisaille. And I think a lot of people do that, but they just don't know what it's called.
Yeah, I actually had heard the term, but I had this sort of arcane sense of it, like it was something. You know how some terms are kind of reserved for certain mediums, like oils.
Yeah, yeah.
And I had primarily in my career been an illustrator, so you know, no one ever used that term. It was always underpainting or underdrawing, and it was done in so many different ways. It wasn't always just monotone. In fact, it could be a little of both. And I actually did some underpainting for a sci-fi illustrator. He was pretty well known. He's passed on now, but pretty well known one at the time, and I kind of learned a lot there. And so it was, you know, in illustration, it just sort of had a sensibility. So the term Grisaille I knew was floating around out there, but I didn't have the understanding that you brought to it. And you know, you used in your video, and this is kind of what kind of broadened my understanding of it. You used some other terms. Trying to remember what they were that dealt with different colors.
Right. So I was talking about Grisaille is basically taking your values and colors and separating them. So then your values become Grisaille, and Grisaille means the gray. And so if you did it in brown, it would be brunaille, and if you did it in green, it would be verdaille. So
those are the ones.
And you also have tiling and midtone methods, which were in the same video. So you can use that separate or along with Grisaille if you were doing, you know, that as an underpainting. But it's not good for like something really simple. I mean, you wouldn't take Mickey Mouse and necessarily do a Grisaille with him if you were drawing him. You would do it for something much more complicated. So it might help you to separate the color and the value for a painting. And so I always tell people when they tell me, well, do I need to do this for everything? Like, no, don't even do it for most things. Just do it for something that's really complicated, or do it partially.
Interesting. Yeah, the underpainting and underdrawing for me, I used to do oils a lot, and we're going back probably 15, 20 years. And I did I wish I could remember the name of the illustrator, but I did an underdrawing, so I guess it's Grisaille. It was all in graphite, and I learned this method from an article that she had posted, and the whole thing was in graphite, and it was on illustration board, and then you seal the whole thing in an acrylic sealer, and then use sort of a classical glazing approach with oils. And I liked using liquid because it dried so fast.
Right. No.
So I guess that's the closest thing I ever did.
Well, I mean, that's basically it. You did exactly, and you did it in the more proper way, because actually if you use a watercolor, that's something that you can apply to watercolor, but this is an old master's technique that was being used for oil for centuries, before anybody tried using it in watercolor, I'm sure. So it actually is more proper to use it in oil, and that's why a lot of watercolor painters or illustrators don't know about it as much, but you can apply it to anything that you can glaze with. So if you glaze with acrylic, or if you glaze with ink, or if you glaze with watercolor, you can also do a grisaille. It doesn't necessarily have to be just for oils, but that's definitely where it started.
Interesting. Got any questions, Marty, or anything coming to your mind?
Well, sure, lots of stuff. I mean, well, there's like the difference between the academic and intuitive approach to art, and I tend to be like, what are those tests you take that tell you what your personality type is? Like, is it an AA, or is it a B, an IB, or whatever the hell those things are? I forget what it's called. Like, but they make you take them in corporate America all the time. Your strength finder, whatever.
Yeah.
But when I think about where I fall on the art spectrum like that, I'm much more on the intuitive side. One reason is that, like, for instance, I was taught to paint under a very strict discipline. So very much learn the draftsman steps first, do the grid method, learn to become a good draftsman, and then you can become a better painter. And it was very methodical for me. And like I've painted with people who spend, we'll get to my question for you, Hajra, because it's interesting. I want to know this about you, but I have to explain some background. So I paint with a couple of artists that one of them can spend an entire year on a single oil painting. And to me, just give me the gun now. I just want to end it right now. If I have to spend a year on an entire paint, I mean, I do paintings and I'm done in like a half hour. And people like my wife and other critics in my life will say, that'd be better if you just spent a little longer on it. And somewhere along the line, it just grinds on my personality. I can't do it. But I always I'm excited to get to the finished work. What about you? Like, how do you feel about your approach?
Oh yeah, I have a terribly short attention span, to be completely honest with you. I mean, I talk too fast for a lot of people, and I knew this from teaching. I was being told all the time, slow down, even though I had good reviews. One of the things that people did say was, slow down. And so I have a really short attention span, and I want to just, burn through stuff. And so for me, I totally empathize with that. But I think what I would do is I tend to have like a variety of ways of approaching that, which is that, if you do work on your drafting skills, which you have, that'll become faster for you, the drawing part. But the painting part will also become faster because you've taken the time to develop your drafting skills, your rendering skills, your, how you look at everything in light to dark forms. And so doing a grisaille for a few pieces will actually speed you up on pieces, whether you're using it or not. So, it does help speed you up, just from the practice of it. And you also don't have to do everything in the same style. I tend to have some stuff where I do an ink and wash, piece, or I do something that's more realistic, and someplace in between for other pieces. And, I've also done, whenever I've done picture books, I've tried to do each one in a different style. If I'm, it doesn't matter, if I'm the same artist, I feel like I can apply different moods or different styles, different color schemes. So try to keep it fresh. But yeah, I don't think keeping at it forever and ever is necessarily the key to a masterpiece. I know people say that, the old masters took years to do something. Well, I guess they must have had really, really good attention spans, and I do, take more time for certain pieces. But yeah, I think that you can make your style looser or omit certain techniques, and also just use practice to get faster after a while.
Well, and I think some people make too much of that. Like when I studied the old masters, I took some art history classes while I was in engineering. And oh, by the way, I appreciate the students who said to you to slow down, because I took calculus like 3 times, and I had a professor who talked really fast. I, kept having to retake calculus over and over, because calculus is not something that's easy to grasp. Yeah, but old masters, like when you look at them, so like if you wanted to become a master, like say in Paris in the mid 1800s, you'd go over there and study, and for the first like 2 years, you're not allowed to put paint to canvas. You have to learn how to make a paint. You have to learn how, what tonal values mean. You had to learn all that stuff before you could actually hit the canvas. once they got there, I think they were more prepared. But I don't believe that it took all of them years to paint things. I mean, like there's many prolific impressionists or French painters that were cranking out work, you know, on a regular daily or weekly basis, even for an oil painting, quite fast.
Yeah, no, it definitely depends on the period too, because if you are doing Impressionism or Neo Impressionism, then you're going to try to do it spontaneously and fast and wet for a lot of it. And it's the same thing for watercolor. Watercolor, in fact, was for centuries not considered a serious medium. It was a medium of sketches, of drafts, of, you know, making stuff before you got to your final lengthy oil painting. So people like, you know, Turner and, you know, Gilpin and all these people, Sargent, Winslow, Homer, and all these people, they decided to make it a reputable medium finally, you know, from the 1700s, 1800s onward. But before that, I mean, I think we're in the right medium if you want to do stuff fast, because watercolor was always the fast medium, and it wasn't always a reputable or formal medium. And I'm really glad that people take it seriously now, because it is such a beautiful, luminous medium that it's hard to believe that it wasn't taken seriously. But a part of that is probably because I think watercolor didn't start out in the West. You know, they had a long history of oil painting, but it started out in the East, you know, in China, and then gouache actually originated in Persia, where my family is from. So it's funny how that stuff moved from the East to the West. So I've always wondered if that's one of the reasons why gouache and watercolor were late bloomers when it came to being taken seriously in the West.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting, because like as a sketch artist, I love to employ watercolors, or just even in my oil painting process, because I just follow that pattern. I'll do a thumbnail sketch with a graphite pencil, and then go to a watercolor to, you know, get a sense of the color and tonal values, and then, you know, start an underpainting on an oil painting. And I think following that process really helps to inform your painting. But just what you said about the oil, like the simple impressionist style, I can't think of maybe trompe l'oeil. Do they call it that? What's the French name for like reproducing?
Trompe l'oeil.
Yeah, trompe l'oeil, the fool the eye.
Trompe l'oeil, yeah. Right. It's like reproducing a bill exactly. I mean, it's like a forgery or a cigar with, you know, the burning embers.
Doesn't it mean fool the eye or something?
Yeah, or like a guy named the French painter, and I can't remember, but Bouguereau does like the girl with grapes and stuff. That's like a photorealistic rendering. You know, that I'm sure that takes time.
It took a long time, and he probably had somebody doing his backgrounds for him. And, you know, I mean, they did a lot of that stuff too, whereas the master did the main figures and somebody else did the background or some of the fills or something. So, I mean, that's definitely going to cut down on his time. But I mean, I think it's funny, different art periods, people are trying to prove different things. And I think in the West, one of the things that did originate was perspective and chiaroscuro and all of that lighting that you can get from that realism. And so I think for a while, people really wanted to prove that they could do that with paint. But once they could do that, and once they had done that, it became sort of more artistic and sort of, you know, emotional. And I think that's why you have the Impressionists, who were the masters of light and color, who were interested in, you know, making something emotive and making something more freeing and sort of expressive with the paint than just showing that they could do what a photograph can do too. Not to say that, you know, realism isn't its own amazing art, but there's more to be said than realism.
So I know, I think Steve, we talked about this one time, maybe was off show, but can you talk a little bit about like the golden triangle? You know, it looks like you can take a seashell, and can you talk a little bit about why that's important to art?
The golden mean, the golden ratio?
Yes. Okay,
so the golden mean, well, it's mathematically, because I've studied physics. If you go, it's the ratio, I think, is at 1 point, it's not quite a third, it's like 1.63 or 1.66.
That's right.
It's an interminable number, but it occurs a lot in nature. So it's one of those things where you backpedal. Math and science do this a lot, where you find a result and then you backpedal and get yourself a formula from that and say, hey, this formula applies to all these things, so therefore it must work. Whether that's a law of mechanics, whether that's a, you know, internal reflection in an optics, you know, when you're looking at something, or whether it's a golden mean, where you say, well, this happens in artichokes, it happens in pineapples. You know, you see the golden mean and Fibonacci sequence, and you work backwards to see the pattern, you record it enough times, and you can find a little ratio for it or a formula, and then say, hey, now if I didn't apply this formula for my paintings, then I will have a pleasing appearance to it. And it's not because we're enforcing it on somebody or making it up. It really is because we see it so much in nature that you are sort of primordially, you know, set up to feel like certain ratios are more pleasing than others.
We just don't realize it like in our day-to-day, but it's really, that's hitting us.
Oh yeah, no, it's everywhere. It's everywhere, and you know, it's a pattern. So it's a repetition and pattern and harmony that you see that we are always striving for in art anyway. But we see it in nature, and you can do it intuitively. You're talking about intuition later. I think people shouldn't undermine that, which is that intuitively you'll probably set something up so it has that kind of harmony or that kind of balance. And if you want to inform yourself, you can learn about it some more and get yourself, you know, so it has it's setting it up for the rule of thirds or using the golden mean. But I do think that people should go intuitively. If it looks pleasing, it's probably sitting in the right place. And that's what I've noticed for a lot of students.
I'm really glad you said that. I mean, I've had people ask me questions about things like the golden mean and, you know, can you give me some pointers on composition? And I've toyed around with ideas for doing compositional episodes. But, you know, there are so many little, I don't know, kind of offshoots of things like the golden mean and the center of interest, you know, the rule of thirds. Yeah, just don't cover it. I mean, they just you know,
but if you look it up, Steve, it's really it really is cool. It's a cool way. Suddenly you realize you've been perceiving things in this way your whole life, but you didn't know how to put it together.
And and I love the way as Hajra was saying, how it works in reverse. Go ahead, Hajra.
Yeah, well, I was just saying, as I totally agree with Steve too, because I think you can get buried under a list of equations or rules for a painting, and it's going to make it so that you don't have that emotion or intuition. But I do think it's beautiful once you make yourself familiar with a painting to then go back and say, hey, what are the rules underlying these decisions that I've been making for a while? And I think that'll help you more than looking for the rules first and then going and applying that to a painting without ever trying to use your intuition.
Great point.
That's awesome. What about, Hajra, what about the classic disciplines versus like digital art? How do you feel about that? And how does it make you feel if you create digitally versus, say, with a paintbrush?
Well, you know, that's kind of a minefield for me, honestly, because I'm so biased towards traditional art. But I mean, I think what I could say to start with is that if you're creating something original and making it yourself, then I think that's art, whether it's digital or traditional. I do think that you can get more effects and sort of automatic mood and beautiful textures and sort of tangible touching, the sketching and doing all that stuff. I think that, to me personally, digital art is never going to be able to touch traditional art for that reason, is because they're still trying to figure out how to make stuff look like proper watercolor or to make it look like you really sketched it by hand. And maybe someday they'll get there, but the whole point is you have the original. So I would feel like that's better. But I mean, of course, if you're taking a photograph and just sort of manipulating it a bit, I don't necessarily know if that should be called digital art or more if it should be called collage. And so, like I said, it turns into a minefield because some people insist that, you know, every type of digital art is still, you know, the same kind of art as traditional art. So I think they are different, but I think it's actually kind of sad that digital art is replacing traditional art. And if you're going to, you know, go and become an illustrator, an artist nowadays, you sort of seriously have to consider whether or not you want to be a dinosaur like me or, you know, and to decide to do traditional art and stay away from digital art. But I mean, people use a lot of those rules automatically in digital programs where they have that lighting set up, they have the perspective set up, they've got, you know, we were talking about the golden ratio and all this chiaroscuro stuff they were talking about. They don't ever learn that or do it intuitively. They just sort of hit, you know, certain buttons and get that there. And I'm not saying everybody does that, but I'm just saying I think that for me, a lot of that joy is the tangible, intuitive part of drafting and painting and touching the paint and the water and stuff. I really don't think that you can replace that with a computer.
No. And I totally agree. And you know, I'm not really too worried when it comes to fine art. I think probably digital has got a pretty firm hold on illustration, and it's gotten that way. I mean, I can only speak, you know, to my background, and that's, you know, I started out before there was digital art. And so when it came in and started to evolve and got better and better, there was a fascination with it. And you love playing with it and seeing how you can imitate. But eventually, and even as an illustrator, that ache just comes back. I mean, I think it does for all artists, where you just feel like this is great, but I just can't, I can't do it all this way. I've got to go back to traditional medium. And I think when you go to be a fine artist, you know, an artist that's going to do work for shows and hang on walls and stuff like that, there is some, but there's not a lot of digital out there. And it's just, I'm seeing that journey, sort of that, you know, it's so easy to change. It's so easy to create quick, to make revisions. You know, you can do everything in layers now, like in Photoshop. It's easy to send to the client. So it's got all those commercial advantages, but there's just nothing, you know, as we've all been talking here, there's just nothing like getting your hands on the actual medium. There's a wildlife artist right here on YouTube, used to be a Disney animator. I don't know if you've seen his channel. His name is Aaron Blaze.
Mm-hmm. I've seen a few of his videos.
Yeah, and he still does a lot of digital art, but he kind of is in that trajectory where, you know, he was in the original type of animation and hand-drawn art, learned that as things progressed. I think he even works on a Cintiq now.
Mm-hmm.
And he's still there, but he's starting to come down back to natural media. And I think he made the comment in one of the videos I watched the other day, just, you know, you get to a point, you can't live without it,
mm-hmm.
basically.
Well, I mean, what I always wonder is, how do you, once you do digital art and you get good at it, like suppose you're a traditional artist too, how do you stop yourself from always hitting the undo button and being able to commit to something instead of just saying, I'm going to keep, I mean, I think it sort of flattens your intuition and sort of your gut instincts for something, and also doesn't let you move on. So I don't know, I would feel like if I did that, I'd be just stuck on one piece forever because the undo button, so.
Well, you stumbled on something really important there, I think, or I mean, intentionally, I'm sure, but like, so Steve, when I got out of school to be a draftsman, I went to, you know, I had learned in school how to draft on a board. See this table here? I still own it.
Yeah.
And then I got to my first job and they're like, hey, we're getting rid of all these boards. Here's your computer. And I said, but I draw. I spent my whole life drawing. And they said, well, that's too bad, buddy. We're doing the stuff on the computer. So to find ways to channel my creativity, you know, like non-digitally somehow. And so it's very much, I think, like a struggle. But eventually, you know, getting there and thinking to myself, well, maybe there's a good balance that I can strike between these two. There are things that I could definitely learn and process through the digital form of illustration. But certainly, as you say, Steve, and you mentioned, Hajra, that it's like, I do think it dulls your senses. It's like a drug you can take. It's like, oh, I made a mistake. I just hit this little button and fix it. Whereas if I do that on a painting, you know, I guess I'm not stuck with it forever. I can always paint over the canvas, but I tend to learn more from that. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. There are some digital tools that I would hate to be without, frankly. I mean, just what you can do with Photoshop to a photo.
Right.
Just to enhance it for your reference, even if you're going to do, you know, a traditional watercolor. And those I would miss greatly. And I am having fun with Procreate on the iPad.
Yeah.
The iPad Pro, that is really nice for doing thumbnails and just practicing certain things. Like, you know, if you want to go back and practice, I don't know, what's the head guy? the Loomis head. I thought, I'm going to brush up on the Loomis head. And you can pull out pencil and paper, but there's not much reason to. And I do both, you know, but pull out, you know, the iPad and do that. Just brush up on the facial proportions and stuff like that. Erase it, do it again. But I mean, there's nothing like, you know, physical media.
Well, I should say too that, you know, it depends on what you know, where is your ox being gored? You know, it's like if you came up and that's what you came up on, digital art, and primarily that's what you learned, I think there's a lot to be gained with, and you can certainly be as creative as the person doing traditional work, and maybe in some ways better. I know some comic book illustrators personally. One of them is named Addy Granoff. He did some of the Iron Man comics all digitally, and that art is just off the charts good.
Sure.
And I love what he's done with it, and I get it, and it has an impact, and you can feel his emotion through the digital art. So to me, I think as long as you can communicate sort of the same sense of emotion that way through whatever means, I'm all for it. I just happen to be like an old dude. I've got some stuff. I use it on the computer, but I just, it gnaws at the soul, Steve. You have to pick up a pencil or a brush and go do it. But I think like we struck gold, like when you can use a brush on a digital tablet and you can get the brush stroke marks and stuff. I mean, my kids all do digital art, and I love seeing their stuff. And now that they can do that, it's like, wow, okay, you can almost,
I think it's interesting, Hajra, you kind of alluded to it. They've not been able to successfully duplicate the experience of watercolor. I mentioned this before in a video. Now, I'm not talking about the look, but the physical experience of putting water down, watercolor down, watching it spreading it around. They can duplicate oil pretty well digitally. Now they can make, and there are some tools out there that look like watercolor. And I think, Corel Painter probably does the best job of having brushes. When you put it down, they'll actually spread and bleed, but it doesn't feel anything like actually painting in watercolor.
I think that if you're looking for it to be not stressful or to have a sort of tangible feeling of some kind of joy of, putting your brush on the paper and hearing the water and seeing it, you're not going to get that with digital. I think that traditional beats it hands down when it comes to the experience, but definitely with the versatility and the convenience and just, that's why it's taking over with illustration. But I mean, I think I just have a traditional bias, and plus I'm scared of that undo button, but but I think anybody else, I mean, I know that Adam Hughes, he's a comic book illustrator, and he's used it extensively where he does his sketches and Copics marker. He basically does a grisaille. I don't think he calls it a grisaille either, but he does it like, in gray and values, and he colors it on Photoshop. So he's making use of both. And so, I mean, and he said he did that because he didn't have the luxury to go to art school or self-educate on how to paint. So, I mean, he's used it wonderfully to sort of bridge a gap that he feels like he wouldn't have been able to. So,
Sure.
And it's different for you, Steve, and I mean, Hajra, probably not so much, but for you and I, we didn't grow up intuitively using digital devices. I mean,
Right.
My kid, from the minute he could walk, my 12-year-old, he's had some kind of device nearby, an iPad or a smartphone or something he, could use and manipulate. And when it's a creative tool and he unleashes his creativity, I think, oh, this is fantastic, whichever you do. Of course, if I'm being very, very honest, I get angry at digital art. I mean, like when I try to do it, I get angry. I'm like, why do I have to go 3 menus deep to find this pencil tip? Damn it! I just reach over and pick up a pencil and and it's just kind of fighting through some of those old guy problems. Get off my lawn, you kids. But
there are a lot of illustrators doing hybrid work.
But Steve, wait a minute. Let me interrupt you here. Okay, so no way, shape, or form are you going to show me a digital artist today that can do what Ralph McQuarrie did, or some of these old illustrators from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. I mean, that art, you can feel them through it in ways I just don't see with like digital illustration.
Well, I mean, I think, Steve, your channel is called Mind of Watercolor, and you don't get a mind when you're doing it digitally. You have a mind when it's spontaneous and it's doing a little bit of what it wants on its own, and you try to work with it. But when it's digital, literally just about all of it is deliberate. So I think if you're getting any kind of accidental effects that you may not even be able to recreate, because it happened when things were bleeding or, something's wet and wet or whatever, I'm sure they're going to try to copy it a bit, but still there will be some algorithm there telling it do this and make it bleed this way and make the dendrites fly, you know, and whatever, do whatever. And it's not actually going to be as random. So, I mean, I feel like, yeah, I don't think your painting has a mind if you're doing it digitally. I think you're sitting there.
No. And I've seen
my opinions. Yeah.
Yeah, no. And I've seen some really cool hybrid stuff. He's a really good illustrator. If you've never seen him, check his work out. His name is Justin Gerard. He's a fantasy illustrator. He's done a lot of Lord of the Rings kind of stuff. And
yeah, I've seen him. He's got really pretty work.
Really cool. And a classical Renaissance resurrected style, I guess you might say. But Justin does a lot of hybrid work, and he'll go in with the equivalent of a Gouache or a Brunei, and then he'll scan that and do the rest of the coloring. But you can tell it's got that feel, a physical type of media that's been put to it. It's hard to duplicate. I've seen a few artists that are really good at it, good at doing digital so that it looks like, it's hard to tell, but there's something about the color that's different, that looks a little more sterile. And I am not, I think every artist that has a passion for any kind of art, whether it's digital or standard media or whatever, should follow it. So I'm not knocking it, but I'm getting back to my original point that there's that ache. And, even the young artists today, Marty, that are being brought up and knowing how to do this stuff digitally, there is a maker movement right now, not just in art, but in all sorts of artisan and craft type things. That fascination has actually been growing.
Yeah, I feel like if you can explore your creative, whatever gifts you have been blessed with, I mean, whatever way you can express them in the world, hey man, more power to you. I just, I mean, we all have our preferences and our biases, and you can challenge them, and we certainly try to do that. I think, at some point though, you kind of settle in with what you feel is comfortable for you, or whatever you can create best with, and whatever best expresses you as a human being. I think that's just fine. I'd like to know from Hajra, how she approaches and views like abstract art. I mean, if you want to talk about disciplines within a discipline, I mean, what do you see when you see like a Jackson Pollock, or forget even a famous guy, but 2 P's and some red marks on a white canvas?
Well, I mean, you've got different opinions. I mean, it depends on the era for me, because I feel like if it was being done when it was a statement, but a brand new statement, to me, that's very innovative, and it's an important part of art history that somebody was saying, hey, I'm making this as a statement piece to make you think about something, or to have a metaphor for something, or to be ironic about something. And some of those pieces actually, even with having those feelings, still end up being really pretty, because you're focusing on the color or the mood or the emotion more than you are anything figural. But I think that sometimes if it's art where I feel like, just like with traditional art, I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. I mean, something might be passé, and you might not be doing it for an original purpose. So I think that, it might be, I mean, I don't want to use the word lazy, because again, that's very loaded, but I think if you're not doing it carefully, and if you're not trying to make an original statement, then maybe doing that just sort of seems to be like riding on the coattails of somebody in the past who did make a statement. But I mean, I do see valuable stuff when I see abstract art, especially all the pioneers who did that, because again, I see the mood, the metaphor, or the irony that they were doing. And in a lot of ways, the abstract color compositions, they still happen to land on the golden mean and all of the other stuff that we were talking about, with a dominant color and a subordinate color, and, warm and cool temperatures in certain places, and, having all that stuff. It's surprising, actually, really, how much of those rules are still applying for all the successful abstract art pieces.
Those are such excellent points. I mean, I talk a lot about design in painting, and I think a design should be there, whether it's realistic, abstract, impressionistic, you name it, but just a thoughtfulness. There's so much abstract out there that is just, it's not thoughtful, I don't think. Or if they did think, I wonder what in the world were they thinking. But just some thoughtfulness, put behind, like you said, the all the elements of art, the color, the composition, the way your eye is led through the piece, the emotion, rather than just, oh, I don't want to do it realistically, so I'm just going to throw some stuff up there, and we'll see what happens. I mean, you can call anything art, and I won't necessarily argue with you, but I love when abstract art has been approached thoughtfully, or when realistic art, and one of the masters of this, I think, is Andrew Wyeth. You can take the realistic art and reduce it to an abstract arrangement of elements, and it's still beautiful.
Yeah, like
it has great design to it.
Well. Yeah.
It's
Hopper's another example of that.
People that works for so many golden age artists and illustrators that it works like that, where you can take just the major shapes and make them the dark mid value or highlights, and have no figural stuff there at all, and it still has an amazing composition.
Let's step back a second, because you mentioned something which I think every artist that's worth their salt struggles with, and that is originality. Whether you're an abstract artist, digital artist, watercolor artist, whatever kind of artist you are, so hard to find that originality, because almost everything under the sun has been done. Or if you put a different way, it's really tough to find that. But my dad, who has been an artist for a long time, almost 60 years, often says, you can't run from it. It'll find you. Your originality will find you if you keep at it long enough. But I wonder about that. How do you find originality, Steve and Hajra?
Is Steve taking that question first?
No, we'll let you do it, Hajra.
Well, I'd say that if you do art for a certain amount of time, I mean, it might even be a few weeks or a few months, depending on how sure you are of what you like. But I think just that's tied in with what is your art style. And people are always saying, well, how do I find my art style, or what is my art style? And I think the answer to that is it's a little bit of an equation. Your art style is what you like best, what makes you really, really happy, whether you're looking at it or making it, combined with your skills, and also added to that, if you're honest, your limitations or shortcomings, and that'll be your current style. And that's why it can evolve, because you might change what you like, or what your skill set is, or what your shortcomings are. But I think that little equation will never be the same for anybody, anywhere. So even in your own life, it will continue to grow. So your own art style will continue to evolve. But as long as you're not trying to copy somebody else and not enjoy what you like and make that, and express that yourself, it's like your handwriting. Your handwriting is your own. We all learn how to do the alphabet, but if you stop paying attention to how you write, and then you write, that's your handwriting at a particular age. I think it's the same thing with art. Like, what do you automatically default to? And when it comes to learning from others, there's nothing wrong with having influences. Everybody has influences. It's hard not to. I mean, Newton said that about Galileo. He said, if I've seen far, I've stood on the shoulders of giants. And he's the father of physics, saying this about somebody else. And that's because Galileo, was talking about heliocentrism and the thermoscope and all this stuff. So Newton, even though he's the father of mechanics, is saying, well, I needed to have a step up from this person in order to get even higher up than that. And I think we'll always have that. So yes, there's been Impressionism, there's been, realism and the Romanticists and all those other things. But I think the way you do it, or I do it, or anybody else does it, is still going to be a different expression than, than whoever's done it in the past, because we're all different people. So, I mean, it sounds romantic, but I think it's also true, which is that the way you look at a tree is going to be different than how somebody else looks at a tree, as long as you're trying to be true to yourself.
Very, very true. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I love the historical perspective you're bringing to it too. That's just gold. I get a lot of people ask. I have, over the years and now on my channel, how do I find my style? What's the best way to find my style? And most of the time, I just tell them to stop looking. Just learn as much as you can. And most of the time, the artists that ask that, or the young artists that are just getting started, they realize they have some talent. They might even be professionals, just starting in a career, and they're looking to almost order up a style, as if to say, well, I'm going to make my style be a little of this and a little of that and a little of this, and your style finds you. think that's what you were saying, Marty. It's just, it's a culmination of everything you are. And the handwriting example, Hajra, is perfect. I mean, it's just, you know, thankfully my art doesn't look like my handwriting, but nevertheless, you know, it's a culmination of experiences, the things you gravitate towards. And I'm just kind of echoing what Hajra just said, but so important. If you're an artist and you feel like you're talented and your art is going somewhere and you're really excited, some style, not constantly learn and try different things that you're interested in, but just try different things and see what happens, see what develops. You know, a lot of times you look back over the things that you've done and you say, oh, wow, you know, there was a style. I remember the first time I heard people looking over my watercolor paintings and say, I like your style. And I was thinking, what style? I feel like I'm still learning how to paint in watercolor. I still feel that way. I feel that way every day.
Yeah, that's
people
so
look at my, and they think they see a style, and I don't necessarily see it, but I guess it's there. But I also think that's really cool. So,
yeah, I think Hajra, you articulated it in like 2 minutes better than the way I've been trying to say it for 40 years. It's pretty good. You're very articulate in the way you describe it, and that's pretty much summed up what I think about originality, and it'll find you and those types of things, like the example with the handwriting. But you know, I just so much of the time, if you fight for originality, it seems to get further away. But if you just let it occur in your work, it seems like more often than not, it will come. It's a weird dichotomy, that originality like that. I try to copy, and which I do often try to use representational art to, you know, copy like the work of an artist I really like. I just did some gouache the other day of a famous illustrator, and I think that helps me. I mean, it'll never be exactly like that guy's art or that girl's art, but at least I'm trying to understand through them and their work how I can inform my own originality.
Yeah,
that was great exercise too, though. I thought you did good exercise.
Thank you.
I try to do master studies on my channel, at least half of the videos, and the other half are originals. And I kind of don't like sometimes how, you know, some people might think I'm not doing any originals. I'm doing half originals, but I think the master studies are so much more important to some people because, you know, it does let you walk in somebody else's shoes and paint with their brush a little bit. And, you know, you can study a painting for 3 hours or 4 hours just staring at it, and you won't get that information. But if you paint just a part of that painting, you'll get so much more information about that artist's technique or their brush strokes or what their emotions were. So I just think, yeah, I think master studies are invaluable.
So, Hajra, let me ask you a quick question about something that Steve and I have touched on before, but it's like, how do you believe that your study of art and what you've learned helps you perceive the world differently? And if so, what ways does it help you? Like, does it, for an example, like I can never look at a tree quite the same way as I did before I studied art, because now I'm observing the way the shadow falls on the bark, or the way the leaf is turned, or something like that. You know, how's it informed your view of the world?
Well, for me, you know, it's funny. It makes me see God in everything because I feel like,
right?
You know, I feel like you see the universe and you see the colors and you see the values, and, you know, in everything that you look at, like you said, you can never look at it the same again, because even if you're looking at a tree and you're painting that tree, when you paint it again tomorrow and you do it in ink and wash versus a watercolor or gouache, it'll be another tree again. And so think about how that is if you did that, you know, in infinity times. And that's basically what God's existence is. And so for me, somebody with a science background, for me, it just makes me think of equations and numbers and, you know, the infinite amount of something that you can look at. And then it's really beautiful to me, because I feel like just like anything you study will inform what you look at in the world, art definitely does that. You look at the colors and you look at the values and you look at how beautiful stuff is. You know, you look at a flower, or you look at a peacock, or you look at a person, and once you paint them, you see so much more beauty in them. So it makes me love people more. It makes me love animals more. It makes me love nature more. So as a result of that, I just feel closer and more in sync with the universe, I think. So just, yeah, I just feel I see different reflections of God and everything.
Wow.
Yeah, that's unbelievable, because that's exactly where I'm at with it. I don't know. Did you turn on a mic or somebody, Steve? Getting some feedback.
Yeah, I'm hearing it too.
We got to mute mic or something, but okay, it's gone away now. But okay, so you were saying that, you know, you see, so it's exactly what you said. You just see beauty in everything. Now, I forget what artist that said this, but what like a French painter or something that said, when I look at ugly people, I see beautiful things. You know, it's like, it's something different, you know, everybody's symmetrical, you know, and our eyes are drawn to that, the Fibonacci equation and the, all that stuff. But when you see, like, I'd much rather, and I figure paint every Sunday, sketch, you know, like, they call it gesture sketching, but you probably studied that or been through that, where you paint or sketch somebody, a model, a nude model.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I beg for the fat people. I swear to God, you guys, the uglier, the more misshapen, the larger. I mean, because they're more interesting to paint than the normal, you know, average person.
I'm
you know,
I'm sorry, Marty. I'm not available for hire right now.
Well, I just had to look in the mirror and be honest. But in all seriousness, though, I love going to class and just seeing somebody different, whether it's a different ethnicity or a different, you know, something that you haven't painted or drawn before, because not only does it challenge you, but you manage to see the beauty in it, as Hajra pointed out. I thank God every day that I wake up and I'm able to perceive the world in the ways that I never could before I learned art.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
It's a blessing.
You know, we got a good segue here, because you were mentioning classical illustrators, and that was another thing that I loved about some of your videos, Hajra, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit. Really loved the line decker. I mean, that, and I could tell it was different than a line decker, but I could also tell that it was line decker inspired. That was really cool. And I think you've done, I mean, he's not really a golden age illustrator, but you did a Frazetta knockoff, sort of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did Tarzan Frazetta Master Set and line deck.
I love Frazetta, and I love that piece. And I think did you do a Mucha?
Yeah, I did a Mucha. I did. I think I've done 2 Muchas so far. So I probably will go back to Mucha, Linedecker, and Frazetta a few times, just because I love them so much. So I'll probably see a few of those guys over and over again.
Marty, did you see her Linedecker, her JC Linedecker video?
It's handy to have my library. I just wanted to, for people that don't know who Linedecker is, if you can see on the screen.
That's you got that book. I want that book.
Yeah, this book's a great book, and it's got lots of illustrations of his work in here. But he did stuff for the Saturday Evening Post.
He did.
If people don't know the Saturday Evening Post, that's like, you know, Rockwell, Norman Rockwell. But these are all Linedecker, great illustrator. And here's the other one you did, Hajra, right? Frazetta, did you do? Yep.
Yep.
And so for those of you who don't know who he was, he's like a very famous fantasy illustrator.
Mm-hmm. And if I have another Frazetta coming up, I'm going to be doing John Carter and Deja Thoris, just the head studies for that. So sometimes.
Nice. I can't wait to see that.
John Carter is a warlord of Mars, right?
And your recent ornaments, your Beatrix Potter. Those were great.
It was for Valentine's Day, and it was fun because I wanted to do master studies, but I was saying this on Patreon too, was that you don't always have to do master studies, so they're the whole thing, or you don't transform them a bit, because you can keep it a little bit more exciting. So yeah, I just thought they make really nice Valentine's Day ornaments. So I handed, you know, Peter Rabbit a heart, and I handed Benjamin Bunny a bouquet of flowers, and I did a few things like that. But yeah, I did some nice ornaments for that.
Yeah, but they so much had the spirit and the feel of Beatrix Potter. You know, it's like I immediately knew what I was looking at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
just realized I got Steve's Steve's video just an R rating or something, because I held up a new drawing of his. Sorry about that, Steve. But
All
there's
right.
some Leindecker again. Leindecker, he's great.
And he did a lot of gridding. You like the gridding too, Marty. But yeah, he does. He was one of those people that used a lot of gridding, especially to make stuff larger and smaller. And he taught a lot of the style and stuff that Norman Rockwell inherited. Leindecker was doing it for decades before Norman Rockwell was doing it, and so a lot of people don't know about Leindecker, but they know about Rockwell. But Leindecker was first.
Yeah.
Leindecker, not as great a self-promoter as Rockwell was, I guess.
And that's a gift to be a social, he was a social media person before the
camera came around.
What's that,
I think
Steve?
by the time Rockwell came around, that licensing and advertising was really starting to expand.
Oh yeah.
So you had all the calendars and the books. That was not such a big thing back in. Did I say Leindecker or Rockwell? Or Rockwell. Anyway, he was just a little more published or popularized, if that's a word.
Well, some people are better at that. Edmund Dulac, after the Great World War, a lot of the big storybook collections were out of style because they were too expensive. So all these commissions that Arthur Rackham and Edmund Dulac and Kai Nielsen were getting, they were no longer getting them after that war. And so a lot of them just stopped working. But Edmund Dulac was willing to draw stuff for everything from chocolate boxes to calendars to stamps to play, backdrops. So, some people are just more adaptable when it comes to certain things.
You said, Hajra, that Leindecker's work informed Rockwell. Well, here's a perfect example of that work. Can you guys see that? Is that in the light? Can kind of see that?
Yeah, there's some pages in that book, in that very book that you're holding, that show side by side Leindecker versus Rockwell and how they are basically the exact same pieces, but an update for Rockwell, how he did it. So.
Sure, makes sense.
Nice.
Those are great. You need this book, Steve?
I do. I've actually seen it on Amazon 3 or 4 times and said I've got to order that, and I just haven't gotten around to it. Yeah,
it's the biggest and best book on Leindecker. There's a ton of them on Rockwell, but if you want to get one on Leindecker, that's the seminal one.
Yep.
It's not cheap. It's like $55 US, but
it's expensive.
But that's like nothing to Steve. He throws that around at the coffee shop.
Listen to you. Yeah, right. I wish.
Yeah, me too.
My gateway drug into Golden Age illustrators was N.C. Wyeth.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I just dreamed about painting scenes like his. I just love the stories that the pictures told, and from that, you naturally go back to Howard Pyle.
Yeah.
And those, I think, were my favorites. And from there, you just kind of discover all the others, like Maxfield Parrish and, of course, eventually Leindecker and Rockwell. But I just loved that storytelling. Originally, that's what I really thought I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
But
people that don't know NC, I happen to have 2 copies of the same book, Steve. If you're ever interested, you may already have this one. Why do I have 2 copies? In case one of them gets dusty.
Hey,
that's not true.
Yeah, man. Let me know. I'll pay for the postage.
Should I send you one, buddy? Yeah. But N.C. Wyeth did some really great illustration for children's books and stuff.
Yeah, he did a lot of great illustrations of pirates. Everything that's in the Pirates of the Caribbean, they stole it right from Howard Pyle and N.C. Wyeth.
Stole it.
Yeah.
That's right.
All of the mood, all of the costumes, all of the stances and poses and everything, they stole right from those 2 guys. They owe their family's loyalties. Royalties.
Yeah, just like Galileo. They stood on the shoulders of giants, right?
Yeah, except for Newton gave credit to Galileo. I don't think the Pirates of the Caribbean people are giving credit to Howard Pyle.
That would have been Walt Disney. Yeah.
Probably not.
Started with that. But yeah, he's a fantastic painter. And I can see why, Steve, you got into him, because these are the stories we kind of grew up with as kids, Yep. And we've fantasized and dreamed, and this is where we spent our childhood moments, and inside of our heads. Look at that picture. That's awesome. That's unbelievable.
Amazing.
Yeah. These guys are great.
And he had just that right amount of stylization you know, to things like clouds and surroundings and gesture. I mean, you know, the best comic artists today don't do gesture any better than he did. Just so much attitude in the poses. It's just brilliant.
Yeah, the posturing from the golden age, I think they sort of have, they had some of it in some campy comic books, but they sort of taken it in a little bit too much of an extreme direction. I think it was at just the right amount when it was in the golden age illustrations. And I think also when you were talking about the right amount of stylization, I totally agree with that, because I feel like all of those illustrations, I think when you get to the hyper real, you sort of lose a mood. I mean, so if you don't want it, that's fine, but you have to make certain choices about lighting and color and you know, costumes when you make it hyper real, and that are sort of like, you can't make it go left or right, versus if you stylize, you can bring down the realism a bit and romanticize the colors, the costumes, the faces, and everything. So I actually feel like it looks more real than the hyper real in some ways, because it conveys that narrative mood so much better.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, everybody, all you viewers that have been watching and hanging in there this long, these kind of nuggets that Hajra is giving us, this kind of obviously historical and educational nuggets. Hey, come on in, buddy. You got tons of that on her channel, so please check out her channel. I mean, every video is chock full of those kind of tidbits. I just wanted to make that little plug.
Thanks.
So quick introduction here is my grandson, Blake.
Hi, Blake.
And he's doing some shadowing with me tonight and tomorrow. So,
Nice.
Blake, here's our, this is live. We're live to all the viewers, all the peoples out there.
He's so cute.
Thank you.
Huh.
I'm sure he'll want to hear that in like several years later down the road, but
Yes, yeah.
right now he's like, don't say that.
That's right. You said I was what?
I know. He's like, I don't know if the shadow thing is worth it.
Yeah.
Say, Blake, do you think you could lend Grandpa and I some of that hair, buddy? I need some.
He's running. He's running.
We need some hair. Yeah, it's a good. I was going to ask Hajra about like, how did she get into YouTube and why? You know, I think that was on our talking list, Steve, because we only have 30 minutes left. This has flown by.
I think she touched on it, but go ahead, Hajra.
Yeah, I think I answered that question earlier in the stream. And I said it was because I wanted to scratch that teaching itch of getting on.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think that it's just a great community. I mean, I hope art gets bigger and bigger on YouTube, but you know, it's sort of still in comparison a niche genre, depending on if you're doing fine art or, you know, illustration. So yeah, I just hope it gets bigger, but it's really exciting to be able to teach this way and talk to lots of people all over the world.
Yeah, I think now with the digital age, it's well, whatever. This is passé to say, but it's kind of been the great democratization of knowledge. Like, you can learn so much on YouTube. I mean, like Harvard, you can take like full classes online, you know, and things like that. And as long as you don't ask for a grade, you know, they're free. And I just think it's great that like people with your type of knowledge are willing to share it. Because back when Steve and I were trying to uncover the mysteries of, say, oil painting, and there are a lot of mysteries in oil painting. Like, you had to like find somebody who'd taken that journey, and you had to climb like halfway up to Mount Everest and find the guy in a cave, and just he holds up a mirror and says, "All the answers are in you, my son." You know, but no, I want to know what glazing. I want to know about glazing, or you know, stuff like that. But yeah, so
you really can make all the searches in the world for like, you know, just something completely obscure that you would have to go to a library and dig through stuff. And it's not just art, it's anything, but YouTube has really helped with that, which is, you know, you can learn how to cook anything, you can learn how to sew anything, you can learn how to fix anything, you know, in your house. Just look for it on YouTube.
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And you know, but what you guys have probably fought this already on your channel. It's such a formulaic world. You know, thanks to people like, and I love Bob Ross, but thanks to people like Bob Ross, you know, there's a step-by-step where he makes you believe there's a step-by-step formula for everything, and there really isn't. And I think he would even tell you that, you know, that's a good way to get started, but you've got to get on a path of discovery and start taking it apart and learning all the nuances and how to do things. You know, I think I did a blog post on this. I can't remember where I said it, but he learned, well, he was taught by a guy named Bill Alexander, but he learned all those quick little formulas by sitting down and experimenting. He wanted to figure out how to paint a painting in 30 minutes. And he experimented with brushes, he experimented with paint, and that's all anybody has to do. It takes time, but it is so rewarding and so much fun. And there is stuff, little nuances of things I learn about watercolor literally every week. I mean, literally every week.
Yeah, I mean, there's no end to it. I think that's the other part of it that I think gets you connected to the universe and like the ultimate reality type, you know, view of it, is that, you know, it's a journey that lasts your whole life. You'll always grow. It doesn't matter how good you are. And if you stop learning, then you're sort of stopping the journey. So there's no such thing as an end to that journey. But I mean, look at where it all started. It started in, you know, 2,000 years ago. In China, people were watercoloring on silk. And then around 105 AD, the Chinese invented paper. And then it ends up, you know, moving west. And then around 900 AD, you got gouache in Persia. And then around the 1300s, around that time, it goes to Holland. And I think it was the Limburg brothers. I can't remember their name. They've got some kind of sausage sounding name. I know that sounds terrible, but it's helpful to help me remember it. But they've got, you know, and they were working not with gum Arabic. They didn't figure that out till much later. They were working with egg whites, and they called it glare. And they were using that as a binder, and they eventually replaced it with gum Arabic. And then, you know, now we know in, you know, modern times that you can use oxgall and, you know, and gum Arabic or glycerin or honey and all these different formulations from these amazing companies. And we don't poison ourselves with our paint the way that people used to before. You know, people were always poisoning themselves with, you know, lead in their pigments, whether it was cadmium or lead white. And, you know, artists used to have much shorter lifetimes when they were working with those kinds of paints in the past. So, I mean, it's a journey scientifically, it's a journey creatively. It's just it's an amazing thing.
Before we get to questions, which we'll start taking here real shortly, you were telling us before we went live, tell us the goat story on your painting. How did you paint it? What is it, the medium and everything, and the story behind the subject?
Well, this painting, I actually also did a smaller original version in watercolor. It's actually available on my YouTube channel if you want to see the watercolor version or gouache version that I did. But this painting is based off of a pet that I had named Lucky Button. He was a real goat. He passed away 2 months ago. And I sort of made him into this sort of European Yuletide goat with these markhor horns, because I wanted to sort of imagine that he's growing old in heaven, and, you know, his horns have gotten so long that they're curling. So, but I made it because I used to have 20 goats in Mariposa. I used to live near Yosemite National Park on 13 acres while I was teaching at a university for 4 years, starting when I was 23 to like 27. And when I was there, I had these goats that we got just to sort of forage the land, and we fell in love with them because they're so smart. They're so smart and so sassy and just really cute. So I have a lot of goat paintings that I've done as a result, and also goat picture books in progress along with other stuff. So, but he's in acrylic. This is metallic acrylic, actually, if you saw it in the light. It's sort of dark, but yeah, it's all metallics. And the smaller version, like I said, is in gouache or watercolor. But and he's got a markhor's horns, but in real life, he was a half Oberhasli, half boar goat. And so that's Lucky Big Wig Button, at least how I feel like he is in heaven.
Cool. I think we lost Marty. I don't see him on there anymore. He may have, his internet may have timed out. Viewers, if you have questions, now's a good time to direct them to us, and just precede your question with an all caps word question, and we'll see if we can answer that. And I'm going to scroll back through the chat a little bit and see if I missed any. There may have been some way back. I'm not seeing any right away. Oh, wait, here's a couple. Okay. Question for, excuse me. Question for all. When did you feel comfortable telling others you were an artist? Since you were kids, or not until you made a sale? Or when? I don't know. I don't remember ever not feeling like I wasn't an artist. I maybe didn't refer to myself as that. How about you, Hajra?
I guess I'm a little bit more annoying than you, because I was telling people I was an artist since I was like 4.
There you go. I don't know if I told people that, but I at least by the time I was in junior high. I mean,
well, if they asked you though, did you, like, if they said, you know, what do you want to be, or are you going to be an artist? Did you say like, I want to be an artist, or I am an artist, or somewhere in between?
I actually didn't want to be in terms of a career. I always wanted to be an artist, but not as a career. Originally, I wanted to be a park ranger, if you can believe that.
That's cool.
I wanted to paint I thought I wanted to paint wildlife.
Well, if you become a park ranger now, can I drop off some goats that you can take care of at some point?
Yeah, sure. So let's see. Here's another question. Let's see. Wait a minute. Is it necessary to have a technique to paint, or on the contrary, anything goes? Well, you know, you inform yourself by the techniques that people have learned already. You know, anything goes in terms of once you learn some of the basic things that people have already learned. I mean, you don't have to relearn, you know, how to control, you know, watercolor, for instance, how to control a wash. And that's what, you know, Hajra and my channels and Marty's channels are all about. We show techniques that people have already figured out. So, you know, if those are shortcuts, I mean, they get you to the point where you can experiment with the more finer points, I guess you might say, and you know, start discovering some little nuances on your own. But having said that, anything goes, you know. So I guess it's both. What do you think, Hajra?
Well, I mean, like, if you want to compare it to something else like cooking, you can go ahead and get an eggplant and just cut it up and have it raw. And if you don't want any training at all, and I'm sure you'll still get some nutrients from it, and it'll still be a nice thing that you had. But I think if you go ahead and decide to learn how to season it or make it in different ways, then it'll be a lot more enjoyable, and you'll probably digest it better. So I think that, you know, it's just one of those things where you have to ask yourself, what's the level of experience I want to get from this? If it's a expressive, you know, free form type of thing, then just raw is fine. But if you want to look for something deeper, you know, have a growth or learning or challenge, then that's where the techniques come in. So it's really what you bring to it and what you want from it when you go away.
Here's a question. Do you feel there's pressure on artists in school to develop a marketable style versus developing one over time? Hajra, I'll let you take that one. You're a little more familiar with the academic scene as regards that.
Well, yeah, people probably do want you to have a style by the time you graduate, because, you know, you want to, whether you're studying art or not, you're supposed to turn in a thesis and, you know, some original portfolio type work. So you would be wanting to develop that. But keep in mind, that's 4 years of a lot of study where you're going to see a lot of artists. And again, so you don't feel intimidated by it. Whether you're studying yourself or you're going to school, all your style is including what you like and not including what you don't like. You will develop it on your own, because you'll say, well, I like miniatures, or I hate oil paints, or I like painting people but not plants. You know, you'll figure it out on your own, and that'll be your style. Your style will be what you do, what you like, and omitting what you don't like. So it'll happen whether you're going to school or not. It'll just happen on its own. But so don't worry about the pressure.
I know that in illustration, commercial illustration, there are pressures sometimes within industries for you to do particular style. Yeah.
Yeah, you can have, if you have a brand and you're an illustrator, if you're not a fine artist, well, actually for fine art too, I mean, I think that I have a disagreement fundamentally with that, which is that some people might want to do different types of styles and might not want to be pushed into a corner. But if you want to make an impression on people that's memorable, there is that type of pressure, which is that if you get to a style that you like, you might have to do a lot of pieces in that style so people can recognize your work. So that's definitely something you have to have in your corner as part of your sort of art sack of tools, which is that if you have a portfolio and it doesn't have a sort of a thematic look to it, then whether you're a fine artist or an illustrator, people will be confused. And I don't think that's your fault. I think that's sort of hemming people in, but that is a reality, which is that if something doesn't look thematic, you will get told by an art editor, well, this piece doesn't belong here with your quote unquote style. So, I mean, that's happened before.
Yeah, very, very good point. Very good point. I think consistency and predictability, and at least in illustration, consistency and predictability is what people hire. They'll either hire you or not hire you, but if your portfolio is all over the place,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they won't know. They'll think that you're still just playing around. If you consistently put forth that style and they know that you can deliver that style, they're more likely to hire you, whatever it is.
Exactly.
Let's see, what do we got here? Please, somebody said, please name the artist you mentioned again. I'll list them below rather than go through. I don't remember. I've got a list on paper. I'll list them in the description once this is recording. What do you want to convey? What do you want to convey? It just depends on the work. I usually just want to convey an emotion or a feeling. It doesn't matter what it is. One of the things I like to do a lot is lead people into the scene. Since I do a lot of landscape, I like to pull people through the painting from foreground and around and through, and I just like them to feel like, you know, some emotion with it. It's cool, the cool breezes that I'm thinking when I paint it, or you know, the sunshine, or you know, if there's rocks, they're standing on the rocks, or just some kind of emotion. But it really depends. If it's a person, I like to communicate attitude. What about you, Hajra?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that from what I've experienced personally, and also from what I've read, emotion and what you feel when you look at a painting is supposedly the most memorable thing about that painting, not the execution, the realism, or whatever it is. It's the emotion, and after that, the color. And after that, you would look at maybe the technical execution of something. So yeah, I think making somebody feel something is probably the most important part of a painting, whether you do it with your composition, your mood, your colors, but yeah, a feeling.
What are some of the best ways to train my eye to see more accurate proportions on live models? Practice, and usually just learn measuring techniques. I always found, and you know, if you find that you're having a really tough time with proportions, don't feel embarrassed. You know, if you have to even go back to proportional dividers. You know, what you want to do is you want to have a consistent form of measuring. I don't know how Hajra was taught. I was taught to hold a pencil at arm's length. Mm-hmm. So it's always the same place, and put my thumb. And that not only gets your drawing accurate, but it also teaches you things. You know, you may only have to do that a couple of times on a human face to realize, hey, the eyes are in the middle of the head. Mm-hmm. Most people draw the eyes too high. And so, you know, if you're measuring and say, hey, that distance is the same as that distance, you taught yourself something. And now, from now on, you know, you can do that. But you're going to always encounter situations where, you know, you don't encounter them regularly, like a building with windows and doors and stuff. And but you can gather a unit of measure that's on the object, like maybe the window, and then you can eyeball it and say that building is 5 windows wide. If you have to hold your pencil at distances, I mean, initially it's going to be kind of tedious. You have to measure. Eventually you'll start to see how your eye gets biased and says, oh, well, I thought it was that, but it's actually this. You got some tips, Hajra?
Yeah, I do. I think I agree with everything you said. And I think that basically what you're saying is that if you need some help, then maybe use some artist measuring tools. And that can be as simple as a pencil or even a strip of paper in a pinch. If you, just to compare measurements on a piece of paper. And if you want to go a little bit more highbrow than that, then you can get a proportional divider and just use it to check certain measurements. You can use it as much or as little as you want. I do have a video on my channel that covers proportional dividers and grids and such. And so you can even hang one up in space, and it's called an Albertian veil. And it was used by a lot of old masters to just hang a grid up in space so you can look at something in receding perspective on the spot. And a lot of artists still use that, especially if you have to sketch something really fast, even if they're good at freehanding. So, if you're on the spot doing some landscaping and you are really confused by something, then, just temporarily hold up a grid and see how things recede and stuff. And like Steve was saying, with practice, that'll become natural and you will end up starting to see these measurements. And if you do check out Andrew Loomis's book, and that's just a standard for anybody wanting to learn to draw the human figure and figure out perspectives and everything, it'll show you basic measurements that you can sort of keep in mind even if you're not using something like a proportional divider. So you'll find out that a head is an egg-shaped oval, eyes are in the middle of the face, half of that distance again is the nose, half that distance again is where the mouth is, and so on and so forth. And that, somebody's 8 heads tall or 3 heads wide. And you'll have that as a general guide, guiding rule if you want that help. And you can get that from that book, and also using an artist measuring tool.
Yeah, there's a lot of belief out there with people who are just learning to draw that if you're not talented, you don't get these things right away. You don't just do them intuitively without thinking about it. That nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, there are those artist geniuses out there that just seem to be able to draw anything without measuring, but without practice, without learning proportions. But the vast majority of us had to learn and practice those things and see them work over and over again and learn how to see, so that just comes with practice. Another one is all of the things that Hajra said are great. I mean, there's so many tools. Love Andrew Loomis. He is still one of the best. I mean, his stuff was first published in the 40s. I think that's right. And it's still a standard, like she said. But there are so many tools out there. One of the things I promote all the time are comparative spaces, positive and negative spaces. So it's a great way to see proportion. And this is sort of the drawing on the right side of the braid approach. So, you look at value shapes. So instead of an eye, you see a shape for a relative value, and then you can verify that shape by the lighter negative shape of this cheek, or the shape of my head, if it's in a box, by this negative shape here. You wonder if you have that curve right. We'll look at that, and then also look at the negative space created by it. Just all kinds of different comparative, ways that you can draw and learn. You just have to practice and see what's out there.
Absolutely.
Let's see. This is a really famous question, I think. Should you paint what people think that you want them to paint, or just do what you love and not worry? Well, that sounds to me like a commercial question. I mean, you should always paint what you love, first of all, whether you're trying to sell it or not. What people want is not as important as what you're passionate about. If there is not love and passion behind your drawing utensil or your paintbrush, you're not going to produce good work. It's as simple as that. That's not to say that you can't do things that people might like and gravitate away from things that people don't like. If you're not trying to sell it, I wouldn't even worry about it. Just paint what you absolutely love and just try to do it better, every time you do it. What are your thoughts, Hajra?
I totally agree with you. I think that if you're hired by a publisher to do something, or you're working on assignment for something, and then you want to, and they're giving you something to draw that you don't want to draw, well, then you have two choices. Either you get the money and you draw that the best to your ability, or you don't take the money and you draw whatever you want. But I mean, if you are doing this as a job, then there are going to be some times where you're going to be drawing or painting something that's super boring, and you're just going to have to suck it up and do it. And then when it comes to your own free time, or if you're just a hobbyist or are lucky enough to be a fine artist and get to express yourself and not care about what anybody else thinks, then you can go ahead and, you know, paint whatever you want. You're definitely going to learn much more when you are painting what you like and what you enjoy than when you're doing something that you don't enjoy. And that work is also going to come out more stilted. But it all depends on whether or not you're being paid or not for that, you know, particular piece. So if you're doing it on your own free time, like Steve said, you know, and do whatever you want. But if you're getting paid, you are going to have to develop a little bit of a backbone to sort of grit your teeth and get through stuff that might be boring to you.
Yeah, and you can really find, I did when I was a commercial illustrator, find a lot of love in the process. I had to draw a lot of stuff I didn't really want to draw, but, you know, I knew it had to.
What was the worst thing you have to draw?
Dumpsters.
Dumpsters?
Dumpsters.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
Yeah, most of the commercial assignments in my area was a very industrial area. So I ended up having, not necessarily because I wanted to, I had to do a lot of technical artwork. So I didn't get to do a lot of the fun, you know, NCY kind of stuff, but a lot of technical artwork. And yeah, there was a company that made dumpster containers. So we had for catalog.
So you didn't get to like, if you like threw in some, like, I don't know, made them like a comic superhero standing next to, that wouldn't have worked. You just had to do the dumpster by itself, huh?
Yeah. You know, I should have done that just for fun and said, hey, you know, knowing he probably would reject it. What do you think about this?
I think you should have. And that way you could at least said that was your first submission. And then, you know, maybe they would have talked you down a little bit, so you could have still had like something going on, like, you know.
Yes. Oh my goodness. But, you know, I did find enjoyment in the process. And by that time, most of that kind of work, that line art work, was vector based. So I enjoyed working with vector tools, digital vector tools, and, you know, learning how to get fast at that. And there was a certain amount of joy and satisfaction in the business process, you know, doing something that I knew the client was going to be happy with, that was technically superior, you know, to what maybe most of my competitors in the area might do. And knowing I could do it probably faster than them, I ended up getting a lot of assignments, you know, based on that criteria, frankly. So, you know, there's just, it's not so much art, but I enjoyed creating it nonetheless. You just kind of have to kind of dissociate yourself from the subject matter.
I had to do a schoolyard with 2 kids in a like urban London environment for a publisher. It was an anthology a few years ago, and put in like a really decorative like background. Like it was really sort of Art Nouveau-y, Art Deco. And of course they turned it down. They said, delete that background and, you know, and put up a schoolyard and a lot of grass. And I said, but grass is boring, but, you know, that's, you know, and they said, no, we want grass. And so, so I put in a whole lot of grass almost vengefully, and then gave them the piece, and that was the end of it. But yeah, it happened with another piece for the same story in that anthology, where I had some really amazing wallpaper behind the dad that was supposed to be yelling at the kid, and they said, get rid of that wallpaper. I'm like, but the wallpaper is the best part. And they're like, no. And so
that's great. Oh man. Okay, let's see. Here's another question. Knowing the rules for music, for instance, is different for Western cultures versus Eastern cultures. Are the rules for art the same for all cultures in the world?
no.
Man, well, it depends on what rules, first of all, you're talking about. There's not a whole lot of rules. I mean, if you're talking about compositional rules, I don't even know where to go with that.
I mean, there's universal, principles of beauty and composition that everybody will have, but they will have very different methods of technique historically. But post like 1930, it's become very global, the art movement. So you end up having a mixing pot. That's what Art Nouveau was. It was a mix of the East and the West. So we actually have a lot of hybrid art nowadays. So all the rules are sort of melting pot together. But yeah, if you go back historically before that, we're lucky enough to live in an era where you can mix like, a Japanese woodblock style with a Western realism perspective style, and you end up with something like comic books. That's exactly where that came from. But, if you were living before that, there was different techniques and rules as to, no realism in the East, very decorative embellishment, decorative stuff on the page, and no perspective, no chiaroscuro, where you had a lot of that in Europe, So there's rules like that are historical, but now you're lucky enough because of the internet and also global everything else to not have those kinds of rules. So, I mean...
So you're thinking more in terms of acceptable. I'm
thinking of art form
acceptable within genres.
Yeah, I'm thinking of art form and technique, but definitely, if you answer the question in other ways, like I don't know, what's okay for some cultures versus not okay in some cultures. Some cultures find it offensive. And this is old school, but Native Americans certain tribes didn't want their photos taken. So you couldn't exactly sell them high school yearbook photos if you went back, 150 years or something. So, it depends on what culture you're going to. Somebody might be offended if you have nudity, or they might be offended, if you put something else in there that is, an offensive animal or something that then in their culture means nothing. Like, in China, for example, you don't do stuff by the number 4 because 4 sounds too much like the word death. So you're not going to have elements in a painting that are 4 elements. Whereas in the West, you would have no problem with the number 4. You can have, 4 flowers or 4 whatever. But if you try to sell that to somebody who's traditional Chinese, they might consider that to be bad luck. So, you do have to be sensitive and learn about different cultures if you're being global. But there's so many ways to answer that question.
Yeah, and the person put thirds and colors as examples. And since they use music,
colors, well, they're probably, I guess they're talking about composition then. But there is universal compositional elements. So if you look at the rule of thirds or certain shapes or colors, we sort of have a universal agreement as human beings, just as a human race, that red is warm and blue is cool, and 1/3 of across the page is more harmonious, and that odd numbers are more exciting than even numbers. So if you're looking for layout, composition, color theory rules, they'll be pretty much the same across the board globally.
Yeah, sure.
Who's got art history.
Yeah, he equated it with music, which is, the implication of the harmonious, and there's going to be some difference in opinion on that, but you're certainly going to know. Most people know what discordant music sounds like, and art, there's probably a little more freedom, but there are rules in terms of color, analogous triads versus complementary triads and that sort of thing. And like she said, there's so many ways to answer that question. I think we're coming to an end, and that's an hour and a half, believe it or not.
Yeah, we lost Marty a while back to the
I know. Sorry, Marty. He texted me saying he's trying to reconnect and got dropped. That's okay. Doing this was great. I think people got a real sense for the depth of information that you have and can offer. And, I can offer firsthand knowledge that you pack a lot of that into your videos. So everybody, please check out her channel. I'll put links to everything I can remember, and lists to all the names and things that we talked about. A couple things that I didn't get a chance to talk about, but she's got a great couple videos at least on comparing watercolor to gouache. So check those out. I don't know if you want to say anything about those, Hajra.
I'll just quickly say that thanks so much for having me on here. It was a real pleasure to speak to you and to Marty. And yeah, I've got all sorts of originals, master studies, watercolor, gouache, and ink, and watercolor versus gouache. And I'd be happy to answer any questions too. If you guys had any questions, just go and ask me on my channel too, if you have any. But again, thank you so much. It was so much fun. And I'm sorry I didn't get to say bye to Marty properly, but it was a pleasure speaking to both of you.
Well, my pleasure. She's got some good videos on one. I just want to kind of interject this at the end. You did one on journals, and you had all these neat little handmade journals.
Right. I mean, I think watercolor journals are a big trend right now, or they've been for, a few years. But I think what's interesting is that if you can get the store-bought home journals for watercolor, and you can also make some at home, and that's an accordion style journal or a folding type journal. And you can also take apart your journals and turn them into, put them into Itoya portfolios and make them so that they are journals where you can change the pages out. You can do the same thing for your ATCs. And there's a lot of variations for all of that stuff. But I tend to have a lot of videos that are motherlode style videos where I show you all my brushes or all my journals or all my palettes or something, or I'm doing master studies or originals. So if you want to go and be overwhelmed by information, then that's the place to do it.
Yeah, no, it's great. I'm getting so frustrated with non-cotton paper in journals, and I just, I'm just so much into cotton paper that I about made the decision. And there are a few journals that I like. I just about made the decision that I'm not going to paint in non-cotton paper journals anymore. I'm going to either start making my own or finding such as I can out there. So that was great. It's a great little video on how to take watercolor paper and cut it into your own little either accordion journals or little quick little journals, that sort of thing.
Yeah, you can
and one more thing I wanted to mention, you do some really great book reviews.
Yeah, I like doing art book reviews because just like Marty, I have a lot of art books. And so I think it's interesting if somebody wants to see maybe an artist, and share that and see what maybe are the good things I got out of that book. So yeah, I like to do art book reviews as well. And, every now and again, certain supplies and stuff, and along with the studies. But I think, Steve, for you, I think they only sell a one Arches field book, don't they? So I think if you didn't want to get that size and didn't want the spiral binding, you'd have to cut your Arches or Fabriano paper down. And I guess you could use like a binder ring if you wanted like a one hole in the corner. But if you don't want that, then you can make one of those no-sew journals with the cuts in it. Or you can actually, get really invested in it and like sew just if you do a few stitches, I can tell you sometime, but you can put an Arches journal together rather easily actually with just a few stitches and an old cover from another journal.
There was a channel called Sea Lemon.
Oh yeah. She does a lot of bookbinding on there. Yeah.
Has some of the best bookbinding tutorials I've seen. So I thought about maybe following one of those. I do like, I'm fine with spiral binding. Is if it had cotton paper in it, I'd be very happy with it. I did find that Cheap Joe's has a Saunders Waterford field book.
Oh.
It's an American Journey, so that's 100% cotton paper. They also have a Kilimanjaro, which is their 100% cotton paper. So there's those two. I still have like 4 of the Perfect Sketchbook, which you can't get anymore. That Erwin Leon produced, on a Kickstarter.
Oh, wow.
So there's a few. I've also been playing around with the idea of disc. Are we familiar with disc binding?
Like what's the method? What's the technique?
Well, it just uses a little round disc, and it's a new form of binding. And you use a series of these discs. The only problem is you have to buy the punch. And it punches a T-shaped hole.
Yeah.
And you can put the paper in on these discs and actually take and rearrange them, which is kind of cool. But that was another idea.
Yeah, that'll work. But you'll just have to lose that left portion where you got the little disc slots there. But yeah, if you ever paint something, then you just scoot it over a bit, I guess.
All right. Well, let's call that done. Thanks again, Hajra. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Hi, Steve.
Hey, Marty.
I'm back for the wrap up.
You're just in time. We were just saying our goodbyes, and I'll let you.
Sorry about that.
I'll hand it over to you. I was just telling everybody thanks and telling Hajra thanks, and
yeah, it was super educational until I got dropped by the digital devils.
Oh, trolls.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Trolls.
Yeah, it was really good to meet you and hear more about your work and your thoughts about art. It was very informative.
Yeah, well, I was really sorry to have lost you. You're such a dynamic duo. You guys are kind of like, wait, if you're Batman and Robin, who's Batman and who's Robin? Who's okay wearing the shorts, the tights?
Well, we're more like Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Well,
if you
Marty is a great interviewer. If you haven't seen some of his where he interviews other artists and his groups, I always love those. So I know he's got that ability to just kind of pull information out of people. So I appreciate having you here for that, and for no other reason.
That's from years of working with politicians.
Well, you're very charming, and
he
was super nice. So it was really nice to be here tonight with both of you. I was nervous about the whole thing, even though I was really excited. You guys made it so much fun. So thank you so much.
Oh, that's great. I don't know. I don't know what the modern rules are in the world today, but I was just going to say that you're very beautiful. You're like an art piece yourself. Your necklaces and your earrings and even your dress is like a watercolor painting. This is
actually a watercolor painting that I did and had printed onto this fabric.
Really?
Yeah, okay.
An abstract art bouquet. So I wanted to wear my watercolor shirt for my watercolor live stream.
Oh man, we should have told that story.
Because I like
2 thumbs up.
Yeah, so this is a watercolor that I did, printed onto a fabric, made into a shirt, and this is made by Colleen Tolland, who's a local artist, and she does amazing stuff. So I make jewelry too, so I like art. I make art, and I also buy art. So.
Nice.
Wow. So if she was on the red carpet and we said like, Hajra, who are you wearing today? And she'd go, well, I'm wearing Hajra. That's it. And you'd be like, oh, okay, that sounds like a really cool designer.
Well, if you guys do miniature paintings, I've been known to set miniature paintings in Dependence and errands and stuff. So then I can say I'm wearing Steve Mitchell and I'm wearing Marty.
That sounds great. Well, thanks very much. It's been awesome, and sorry I missed out on a little bit of it.
Yeah, I'm sorry too, but it was lovely with both of you, and I hope you guys have a good night, especially because you guys are all the way over on the East Coast, and like it's later. For me, it's only like 7 o'clock. For you guys, it's like late.
Well, come back again sometime. I hope you'll be a guest of ours.
I would love to. I would love to. I mean, if you guys are doing this so much fun, does that mean we can make it into like the Three Stooges at some point? Because
well, I don't know what Blake feels about that.
Curly, or Champ. I'll take Champ too, but
Oh, Champ. He doesn't get enough respect, Champ.
Yeah. You'd be the one bopping us on the head all the time.
Oh, I'll have to invest in a beard. I told you I have to buy a little fake beard to pop on. So.
Fair enough.
Okay, good. I'll let you guys go. This will go on forever.
All right.
You have to stop the stream now and go to sleep.
Thanks, guys. You guys have a great evening.
See you next time.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.